I want to learn a bit more about the island's little-known history, so today I'll be visiting some of the island's last remaining historical sites, traveling mainly by public bus. This gorgeous park you see right here is the Pedro-St. James National Historic Site. This structure you see behind me is called Pedro Castle and is the oldest, largest, and most remarkable building on the Cayman Islands. It was originally built in 1635 by a Spanish settler, hence the name Pedro, but originally it was nothing like this. The current structure we see took shape in 1780 when a local Englishman by the name of William Eden redesigned the building, turning it into a courthouse, jail, and public pound. In the 1830s, it became one of the most important buildings in the islands, having been the birthplace of the island's first parliament, as well as the venue where the abolition of slavery was announced. Not long after, the house was destroyed by a fire, and it remained largely in disrepair until the 1960s and 70s, when it was purchased by an expat who decided to redesign it to look like a castle and turn it into a tourist hotel, hence the name Pedro Castle. However, his business didn't go as well as he had planned, and the structure soon once again fell into disrepair, and throughout the course of its history, the castle has fallen victim to hurricanes, fires, and vandals. In the late 1990s, the Cayman Islands Trust Fund reconstructed the building to its original look. Today, the building serves as a living museum, offering visitors a glimpse into colonial life on Grand Cayman. The house is also reportedly cursed and haunted. This man right here is James Jackson. He was actually sitting in this prison cell for 6 months awaiting a murder trial. And during this time he actually fathered a child with one of Eden's slaves. Oh, we have some Cuban parrots up there eating nuts from this tree. Oh wow, beautiful. I was hoping we'd see some of these guys. Incredible. The bus to rural areas like this may seem a bit problematic, but the driver said when we're finished we can just have someone call one of the drivers and they'll swing by here and pick us up to take us to our next destination. It's actually one of the best bus services I've seen. Price is based by distance and you can literally get to any part of the island. Can you stop here? We just arrived in Bodden town and the bus dropped us off in front of this nice church. Founded in the late 18th century and named after a descendant of the island's first permanent settler, Bodden town was the island's first settlement and served as the capital of the Cayman Islands until Georgetown scooped that honor in the mid-19th century. In just 2 centuries, the town's population rose from a measly 200 to over 10,000, making it the fastest growing region on the island. Despite this, however, the town has managed to preserve much of its original history and culture, making it one of the last traditional towns on the island. We want to go to the mission house.
Mission house? The mission house? I would know. That would ask somebody else.
Oh, okay, that's fine, thank you. We are going. This building you see behind me is the mission house. It was originally built in the 1700s but rose to prominence in the 1800s when it got its name due to the amount of teachers and missionaries that lived in this house.
A replica of a building that was destroyed by Hurricane Ivan here in 2004. This part was probably built in the 1830s, 1840. The second story was added in about 1900. The first people that lived in the mission house were missionaries, the Reverend and Mrs. Redpath, and they were from Scotland. Then he was ministered here from about 1890 to about 1900, when I think he moved on, and he sold the house to Mr. and Mrs. Lyons, and he was a teacher and taught in the lower part of this house, which he used as a school, and they lived upstairs. Mrs. Lyons taught dance and other things. He taught English, well, the 3 R's, reading, writing and arithmetic. He was brought in to keep the lady company as a sort of, what they used to call in Britain, a paid companion. And she would be someone there to talk to and to pass the time. This cabinet came from Bodden town people. They weren't necessarily in this house. Some of this pottery is called annular ware, which was pottery made from the 1700s. This is a demijohn, which would be a huge pot, which would contain water or oil or things like that. But
they catch like rainwater, yeah?
Yes. Yeah. Or they would go to this pond at the back here because they found evidence that people used to, well, it would attract wildfowl, ducks and so on, so people would shoot animals for food. One year, a ship was shipwrecked off the coast of Bodden town. They were able to salvage from that ship samples of cooking oil, so they would take gourds, they would take any kind of container that they could find. So that gives you an idea that they weren't very wealthy. It's a hand-to-mouth existence. Borden, because the chances are, if you were called Bodden, you couldn't read it anyway. So it was just what you called I Bodden, right? So they would write it as they saw it. And that name comes from the far southwest of Britain, a place called Cornwall, which is where I'm from. Because I've got a routine, I'll just show you the bathroom. Nothing of note really, except to say, of course, there was no indoor plumbing, there was no whatever. They didn't do that. Clothing was simple. People that settled first in Cayman were deserters from an army that captured Jamaica from the Spanish in 16 something or other. And Jamaica was such a hostile environment that some of the soldiers, some of the sailors said, Jamaica farewell, and off they went to Cayman and settled here. This is not by any means something I'm particularly proud of, but it strikes me as being absolutely beyond belief that a country that's a little country off the coast of Europe managed to colonize vast amounts of territory around the world.
Fajny facet. These scary looking men right here are actually missionaries. What did they use slaves for here? Because there wasn't much industry.
For home,
Yeah.
domestic service, chopping the yard.
This was the only island where 1 in 2 residents was a slave. Aside from tourism and banking, another major industry on Grand Cayman is rope making. That was a really interesting tour. Our guide told us a lot of things that you won't find in any history book.
That is called an agouti. Sometimes call it the Cayman rabbit. It's actually a rodent, but it's a harmless rodent. It's a herbivore.
They're so fat. Yeah.
There's not much. If you had a chicken in 1910 or 1900, it wouldn't be allowed to roam around free. It would be inside a cage.
Oh nice, this is the side of Cayman few tourists ever see. Completely different life in this part of the island. Shows that not everyone here is wealthy.
Everybody knows you?
Not so more, because with the expanding population,
Yeah.
and I left teaching 7 years ago.
All schools are public or private?
There are private schools. The problem is that people who have children who aren't citizens can't send their children to public schools because essentially there's no room. But it's now year round.
Because on the winter everything is more expensive.
Yes,
Right now it's
yes.
cheap.
The Cayman is an expensive
Yeah, it's very expensive.
place to live. And this is called the Lighthouse Club, which has never been a lighthouse. It's always been a restaurant or bar or club.
Our tour guide from the mission house was kind enough to give us a free ride to the Queen Elizabeth Gardens. Tak ludzie gadają na tych Anglików, a wcale nie widzę, że ci Anglicy ashole były.
Ja musiałam to zrobić.
Absolutely incredible. This lush habitat I'm walking through right now is part of the Queen Elizabeth II Botanical Garden, a nearly 64-acre garden opened in 1994 by Queen Elizabeth II herself. This spectacular garden contains nearly half of the native plant species found on the Cayman Islands, as well as thousands of plants from other countries and the island's famous blue iguanas. Oh wow, this is cool. This is basically what the entire island looked like before they started developing it for tourism. Oh, this is cool. This is actually called a gumbo limbo tree. It's also called the tourist tree because you see it's red and the skin peels off just like a sunburned tourist. It also has a sap in it that actually contains medicinal properties. This building right here is the Rankin House. It's over 120 years old and it's a fine example of a traditional Caymanian home. This actually isn't the original location. It was actually moved here in 1995 from East End. Oh yeah, it's really cool to see some of this historic stuff today because very few people actually know about the history of the Cayman Islands or take time to explore these kinds of historic sites. Amazing. Right here is the kitchen. You'll notice it's actually separated from the rest of the house. This was mainly to avoid fires and the smell from filling the house. Yeah, some rural areas in the Caribbean islands still would do this type of kitchen. Oh, this strange looking tree right here is a silk floss tree. I think it's supposed to be the lake, which was the most beautiful part of the garden, but as you can see it's kind of dry. It's really strange considering this is the wet season. Oh, we have another agouti over there. They're actually not native to Grand Cayman, but were brought over from the Lesser Antilles. Oh, those animals right there are green iguanas, and unlike the blue iguana, this species isn't native to Grand Cayman, but was introduced here from Honduras. The local government actually encourages hunting of these iguanas because of the problems they cause, such as destroying power lines and native plants. And there it is. The famous and extremely rare and endangered blue iguana of Cayman. Found nowhere else in the world except this island. This is actually the largest native animal found on the island, and it's also believed to be the largest species of lizard in the Western Hemisphere, as well as one of the longest living lizards on Earth, capable of living up to 70 years. By 2003, fewer than 15 of these animals remained in the wild, and the species was predicted to become extinct within the first decade of the 21st century. In an effort to preserve the species, the Caymanian government began a captive breeding program, and today there are more than 700 blue iguanas living in the wild. A small population was released here into the Queen Elizabeth Botanical Garden in an effort to offer both locals and visitors the opportunity to get a glimpse of this rare and majestic creature.